All right. I'd like to introduce you to my dear friend and colleague, George Nassos, who's going to introduce the speaker. George is a parishioner at St. Peter and Paul, a Greek Orthodox church, and we've been working on this for 9 years now. It's the 9th anniversary. So with that, and our time is really tight. We're going to have it for a half an hour. That it's going to include questions and answers, Q&A. And then because our guest has to catch a flight to Spain tonight. So, and then afterwards, after she's done speaking, we just want to talk a little bit about the declaration over here that was signed. It's an ecumenical document, so we'll address that too. So here, George.
Okay. Thank you. When Sarah Elizabeth told me that she had a time constraint because she's going to Spain, I said, is there any country you haven't been to? She says, oh yeah, plenty. I've only been to 105. So anyway, this is going to be short. I met Sarah Elizabeth about 20 years ago. She was a volunteer for the United Nations, traveling around the world, helping underprivileged communities all over the world for their youth. And she said, you know, we have plenty of youth that need help here in Chicago. Why should I be traveling around the world? And we met, and 16 years ago, she found a former dental tool factory on the southwest side in a under-resourced southwest side of Chicago. And she started the school, primarily 96% serving the minority. And her goal is to produce the next generation of critical thinkers and mindful leaders. Forbes has called her one of the nation's top 5 game changers in education. And I can tell you more about her, but I think you need to hear it from her. So here's Sarah Elizabeth Ippel.
Thank you, George. I'm just going to give this a test. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, just give me a wave if I need to speak up a little bit, but I'm just so excited to be here and so grateful for this opportunity, and I'm inspired. I'm inspired by some of the things that I've heard tonight about the role that we all have to play in the care of creation, and inspired by seeing everyone coming together, and this is just an exciting night for me, and running into some people that have been involved actually 20 years ago when we first opened our doors. So Sherry, it's good to see you again. But excited to share with you a little bit about this journey in hopes that it might inspire you in terms of the way you're thinking about the role that we all play. So maybe I'll share a little bit about my story, just in terms of how in the world this public school came to be in a dental tool factory on the southwest side of Chicago 16 years ago. It's been operating now for 16 years. And tell you a little bit about myself. I actually left the Midwest. I grew up in Michigan, left the Midwest for the first time, and went to England for graduate school. And this was one of the first times that I was sitting in a room filled with people from all over the world who spoke different languages and had different perspectives and different beliefs. And I was awestruck. I wasn't studying education at the time, but I became so fascinated and intrigued to understand how other people had learned differently, how they were thinking differently about the world, and I started developing all of these questions. And so as a way to sort of answer these questions, I packed up my dissertation writing, and I started traveling with my backpack, started traveling in other countries with a fascination to sort of visit schools. Really asking these questions and making these realizations for the very first time in my naive, early 20s, realizing that our world is really changing, and it's changing fast. I started wondering how in the world, with all of these changes, with all of the things that are happening in our environment, how are we preparing this next generation to be equipped to really be the leaders that we need them to be, with the skills that we need them to have? I started realizing that our world is far more globally connected than I realized growing up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We're facing these unprecedented environmental challenges, and we somehow need to be educating kids to figure out how to thrive in a world where there is a lot of uncertainty in our future. And so I decided, maybe I need to go back to school in some sort of way, right? Back to school to sort of learn and understand how to make sense of all of this and how to translate all of these questions that I had into some form of action. So I started traveling, and as George said, this little passion and curiosity shifted at some point to more of a determined quest to study and understand these international systems of education. So with my backpack, I eventually traveled to over 100 countries, where I started seeing some of the most tremendous disparities and realities facing our world. I had so many questions that ultimately became the foundation for, that led to kind of creating the Academy for Global Citizenship as a prototype. And I'm not going to dive into all of these stories tonight, but I will offer you an invitation to hear more about some of these adventures and stories and lessons that I learned along the way by coming and visiting us on the southwest side of Chicago, but learned lessons in places like Iran, learned lessons in some of the most kind of unexpected places. Oftentimes we hear about certain countries or certain parts of the world having phenomenal schools and educational systems, and yes, that is true, and at the same time, witnessed, for example, in Tunisia and in Iran, the power of multi-generational communities coming together, the power of multi-generational learning. Making these connections with our food systems and nutrition and resilience with our kind of urban agriculture systems, all of these things and how they play a role in the way that we're thinking about education. I realized that one of the most important things is integrating nature and ensuring, this how could we enable children to fall in love with nature? It's something that we think so much about at the Academy for Global Citizenship. If we're going to really cultivate this next generation to do something about climate change and to take action to create a more just world, they first need to care, right? They first need to fall in love and appreciate nature. And so these are the kinds of lessons that I learned all over the world and realized that ultimately schools have a pretty powerful role to play in shaping these young people. So with all of that, and without diving into all of these lessons, I'll tell you a little bit about what happened when I moved to Chicago, and George remembers these days because I was riding my bike around Chicago talking to anyone who would listen to me as a 23-year-old with all of these ideas and opinions about how we just need to fundamentally reimagine the future of education. And I thought for sure if I wrote this 600-page proposal and I went to the Board of Education at Chicago Public Schools, that they would absolutely agree with me and they would say, this is a wonderful idea. That is not exactly what happened when I went down for the first time on my bike with all these printed proposals that they required me to submit. But over the course of 3 years, I kept riding my bike, I kept going back. One time a year I went back, and eventually the school was approved as a public school, which now makes me a little nervous. At the time I thought, this is such a great idea, and now looking back I think, I can't believe they let a 23-year-old open a public school and a dental tool factory. But needless to say, the Academy for Global Citizenship was born. We opened our doors in 2008 in a former dental tool factory, where George had mentioned we serve 96% minority, primarily low-income students on the southwest side of Chicago. And the idea is to fundamentally reimagine what school can be. And in addition to teaching academics, of course, as a public school, how are we really integrating all of the other necessary skills to really ensure that this next generation can not only thrive in our world and become these problem solvers, but also have the empathy and the commitment to making a change in their community and in the world. So I'm going to give you a tour when you come down to visit, and you can kind of see all of these things in action. But these are some of the different elements that we integrated into sort of the foundational ethos, all centered around environmental sustainability and empowering students to become these environmental stewards. But all of these pieces that you're reading about, global collaboration, having connections to other countries and students all over the world, All of these things are so critically important to developing these creative, entrepreneurial, social justice activists, students. Here is one of our students with our schoolyard chickens. So we've done quite a bit to really think about how we integrate nature into a very urban part of our city that has lacked nature for many, many years. But many, many things that have been kind of incorporated into the model at the Academy for Global Citizenship with a focus on being a learning laboratory, not just being a place for our 500 students every day, but being a place where people have now come from all over the world. Over the last 16 years that we've been operating this public school, we've now had 10,000 educators come from all over the world to study our model, and we've been able to impact 5 million students. So when we talk about the Academy for Global Citizenship today, we say, yeah, it's a public school, but it's also a learning laboratory. It's a place where we can be incubating these innovations, incubating these ideas, rethinking the future of education, where sustainability and environmentalism is at our core, and enables us to reimagine education, not only for our young people on the southwest side of Chicago, but as a model for the world. So some pretty exciting things have happened over the last 16 years, not only in terms of the scale and the broader impact and in the reach, but I got to tell you, in that very first year in the dental tool factory, there was definitely a moment, and Sherry remembers because she came down to visit, or to volunteer actually in that first year. But, we were sitting around in the dental tool factory and we're so excited, like, oh, we finally we're sort of, this vision's becoming a reality. And here these first students were coming into the school, and boy, were we excited. And at the same time, we were filled with so many more ideas about, wouldn't it be amazing if someday we could create a building, or we could create a campus that reflected every one of those things that you had seen in terms of our ethos. What if we could create a building that had a huge farm? What if we could create this campus that generated all of its own energy through clean and renewable resources? We kept dreaming, we kept fantasizing, we kept creating all of these big, bold ideas for reimagining architecture and thinking about how do we create a space that inspires this next generation. And I'm excited to tell you that all of this has now come to fruition. So we're sort of entering now like the next chapter. And for many, many years when we would talk about this, we would talk about a net positive energy campus, or a farm where we could produce all of our food, community walking trails and gardens and apiaries and orchards, fossil fuel-free campus and battery storage and all of these things. People thought I was nuts. They thought, this is some form of like daydreaming, right? This sounds pretty impossible. There's a reason why something like this doesn't exist in a place like Chicago, in a state like Illinois, where our climate isn't super friendly to a net positive energy, building. But some pretty exciting things are now in the works. We're actually days away from this building opening its doors. You're going to get a little sneak preview. Not many people have seen what's about to happen, but on Tuesday, we are opening our doors to this dream. It's a 6-acre campus in the center of a public housing project site, 2 blocks away from our location. So we're in the same community, same kids, same families, but a 6-acre piece of land that has been transformed into not only a school, not only thinking about how we integrate all of these lessons into the way that we design a space, but how do we actually reimagine the role of a school and what it can play in an entire community. Because I know all of you know that working in a community like ours that has been, suffered from decades of environmental and racial injustice and disinvestment, what's been so challenging is, although our students can come to this beautiful school and have this healthy food and spend time in nature, they go home at the end of the day and their families don't have access to health care. Their families don't have access to fresh food. Their families don't have access to economic opportunity. And so we've begun sort of pushing the envelope over the years, thinking about what more can we do, right? Why does a school just have to be a school? Why can't we kind of push the boundaries and think about how we can integrate all of these resources into a holistic community hub where every member of a child's family, every member of our community can come and get access to these resources. So this is now the first phase of this. So the building that you see, the big one covered in solar panels, that one is done, it's constructed. We just got our certificate of occupancy this week, which means we're allowed to open our doors next week. So we're pretty excited about this. And this gives you a little bit of a sneak preview to kind of what's going to be happening there. But essentially, this is what's happening. And the idea here is now, just like we've scaled and shared the Academy for Global Citizenships model as a model for rethinking education and rethinking how sustainability can be so core to how we're educating our young people, we're now hoping to share this model for what a holistic community hub means, particularly in communities that don't have access to these resources. So I know that this is impossible to see, this tiny print, so I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on here. But we have this main building that's actually going to house the school, but it's also going to house a healthcare center. It's a federally qualified healthcare center, so that means anybody in our community, regardless of immigration or documentation status or insurance status, everybody can come and receive access to healthcare. There is going to be an early childhood Head Start program, so even our youngest learners are going to have access to education, which is so essential and critical, especially in communities like ours. We've got those walking trails and apiaries and orchards and community wellness facilities. We have 6 teaching kitchens. So we're currently in a food insecure community. So we have 3 acres of farming and urban agriculture where we're going to be able to grow a pretty substantial amount of food that's going to be integrated into the food program for kids, but also into a fresh food marketplace so people in the community can come and get access to fresh food. So lots of cool things that are going to be happening here. You may or may not see the alpaca and the chickens, but we've got aspirations to have animals on our farm, again, to really instill this love and connection to nature and the role that all of our children and all members of our community have to play in caring for creation. So from all of this has launched a new nonprofit organization because we realized this is kind of a lot to take on for a school. And we saw there being tremendous benefit and value in having more members of our community kind of come and co-create and co-envision this future together. So we now have Cultivate Collective, which is an additional nonprofit organization that's being governed by members of our community, that's led by members of our community, that is really focused on these 4 foundational elements. 4 things that I wish I could say like, oh, we invented these, but really they're evidence-based best practices and honestly things that probably you could tell me because these are such foundational things that every community deserves. And it's the elements that you see around education. So education not just for kids, but we all need ways to plug in, right, at every stage of our lives, and there's so much that our young people can be learning from different generations. So we focus on multi-generational learning pathways. So not only ensuring that we've got this amazing school and this amazing early childhood program, but throughout a lifetime, what are avenues where people can coming and learning new trades, coming and learning, maybe there's workforce development opportunities for people who are looking to increase those skills. Wellness is such a critical one. We have a 53% higher obesity rate in kindergarten than the Chicago average. So these elements around food security and food access and health and nutrition and just learning these fundamental building blocks are so critical for people to thrive in the world and to people to create meaningful change in the world. They have to have that healthy foundation. And so health and wellness is another core pillar. And sustainability, as I mentioned, this is going to be the first project in the state that's actually producing more energy than it uses. So we're on track to achieve something called the Living Building Challenge. It's something that's been done in 26 places in the world. but not yet in our climate region. So it's a pretty big deal. If we can prove that we can do this in Chicago, then it makes it a lot more accessible for people to kind of take these lessons and apply them to the next, the next building that goes up in Chicago. So through those 550 kilowatts of solar panels, those photovoltaics, and a whole slew of other engineering and other strategies that have been integrated into the design and the architecture, the engineering, the orientation, all of those things, the building is on track to achieve an unparalleled level of environmental sustainability, which is not just cool because it's like, having a lesser impact in the world, but it's going to be this kind of interactive, experiential learning lab for kids who are going to be learning there every day. They're going to get to see how those solar panels work. They're going to get to see how the 50 geothermal wells are contributing to this sustainable campus. They're going to be able to kind of learn and interact with these. We've got kind of these technology displays that are going to be showing how much energy we're using at any given time. So it's going to be a real live kind of learning tool for kids, and also probably the adults are going to be the ones that are going to require a little bit more of a learning curve than the kids about how do we change our behaviors to have less of an impact on the environment. So we're already working on our second phase. We've got some ideas in the works about what more can we be doing, especially now that the Chicago Housing Authority is going to be breaking ground on 700 units of mixed income housing surrounding this project. So even more critical for us to be thinking about what are those 700 families going to need in order to thrive. And so we're working on some elements related to our second phase. So if you come down and visit, we can tell you a little bit more about the Green Business Institute and some neat things that we've got in store. But essentially the whole vision here and the whole mission is about welcoming the world in hopes that we can together have these ripple effect moments, in hopes that, whether it's a child or a young person or one of you coming in and volunteering, that together we can create these waves of change that are going to make an impact in a broader impact in the world. So I'll leave you, I guess, with this and just kind of bringing it back, I think, to what Bishop Casey said about how we all have this role to play. And I oftentimes think that when people think, oh, we're being a little bold or a little too audacious, or maybe we need to scale back these plans to be a little more realistic, I really do believe at the end of the day that the audacity of our dreams today are absolutely imperative and essential for shaping our future. So thank you so much for this opportunity, for letting me tell you just a little bit about what's happening. And I think we've got some time. If anybody has any questions, my contact information is up here too, because I welcome anyone who wants to learn more, have a follow-up conversation. The school, yes, the location. So it is on the southwest side of Chicago, just off of Cicero. So if you ever travel out of Midway Airport, take a peek. So it's 44th. Yep, in the former LeClaire Courts housing project site. So if you drive down Cicero and you've noticed like 40 vacant acres where the LeClaire Courts used to be, and that's now under redevelopment. But you'll be able to see the new campus.
Because we're recording this and it's on the live stream, if you could come up and use the microphone, we'd much appreciate it. So then people on the internet will be able to hear you.
What are you doing in Spain?
Yeah, I'm going for the weekend. So a funder and a very good friend is having a milestone event, and although it was a bit ill-timed, I thought, well, I could make that 10 o'clock flight, so I'm going to go and, celebrate and then come back, because on Tuesday we're launching our early childhood program, so it's going to be a very quick trip.
What have you been most surprised of in this whole endeavor?
Oh, think what surprises me and also inspires me is the power that children, that very, very young children have to play in creating change. And I'll never forget, in some of our earliest years, here we were, a bunch of young 20-year-olds, like with all of these ideas, pretty naive. And I'll never forget, what started happening a few weeks into operating the school. Kids started coming to school with these big bags of stuff, and we're like, what's going on? And what started happening is kids were learning about composting and recycling, and they went home, and these 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds were like, no, we cannot be throwing these things in the landfill, Mom, Dad, So families were like, please, my child will not let me throw these things in the waste bin. Like, can we compost them or recycle them at school? And it's like, wow, it's amazing that, if I think about it in my own experience, right? When a child asks me to do something or asks me to change my behavior, you take it a lot more seriously than if your friend or adult, says something to you. So it gives me a lot of hope. Yeah.
How many students are you currently serving, and how many do you expect to serve in that building?
We currently have the max capacity of 468. And in the new building, we'll have 620. Yep.
Do your students come from all over Chicago, or are they mostly right from the neighborhood where the school is?
Yeah, majority of them live right in the neighborhood, vast majority of them. We don't have any busing or transportation because it's really been designed to be kind of a community-centric and community-serving school. But the law allows anyone in the city of Chicago to enter the lottery. So every once in a while, we get a determined parent from Englewood or another part of the city that gets into that lottery, and they drive their kid every day to the school. But for the most part, it's pretty neighborhood-centric. Yeah.
How in the world did you finance that dream?
I kind of glossed over that, right? Like what I've been spending the last 20 years of my life working on. So that's a pretty good question. So this first phase of what you saw is $63 million. And that's, the land acquisition, but also a 71,000 square foot building, a 6-acre site development. It's been a big project. And 31 million came from the state of Illinois, which is really incredible. I think the state saw this as, they have a Rebuild Illinois capital bill, and they saw this, given the level of innovation and sustainability, I think that they saw this as kind of an opportunity for the state to be learning about the future of sustainable technologies, many of which are being integrated and piloted for the very first time. So one of the joys of the project, but one of the challenges is that we've been the first to do quite a few things with this building, which has meant that all of the city inspections and the city departments and the permitting and the approvals has been an adventure. But that's kind of been the point, right? It's like, if we can work out these, kind of get through these hurdles, it's going to make it easier for the next people. They won't look at them like they're crazy when they say, we don't have any fossil fuels going into in this building. So the rest of the funding. So 31 million came from the state, and then philanthropic support. There's something called New Markets tax credits. We've had kind of a series of different financing streams come together to make it all happen.
With the wealthy suburban districts that we have, what would be the first initiative to get them on the path to this type of rethinking?
Well, one thing that I think can be so powerful that in the grand scheme of all the different, it's like there's a trajectory, right? And it starts oftentimes with a single step. And one thing that I think can be really powerful that relatively, is a relatively low investment is even just having a sustainability role within a school or a district. I mean, it can start at a district level, but then also within a school having sort of a sustainability coordinator position whose role it is to really integrate sustainability and environmental education into all of the practices, both on a curricular level, but then also on an operational level. So I think that oftentimes can be a really great strategy. I also think it's just, there's so much data around how a healthy building in terms of air quality, in terms of environmental impact, how this impacts students' brains and learning and development. And so sometimes that can also be a helpful incentive, right, for people to understand. Should we do one more question? Yeah. Oh, yeah,
On the
sorry.
spectrum of schools, I was just curious, is this like charter school or a public school or a magnet school, or, I mean, where does it fit? Private school?
Yes, great question. So it's a free public school. It is a charter school, so it's part of the Chicago public school system. All of the students are Chicago public school students. We receive funding as a Chicago public school, and have certain autonomies as a charter school, right? Or ways that the district allows us to innovate and do things a bit differently, as long as we're achieving the outcomes and administering standardized testing and complying with, you know, a massive contract. We are given certain kind of abilities to innovate.
Okay, this will be our last question.
I just want to say this is incredibly exciting. You are incredibly inspiring. And as you came up tonight, I remember you said this was about 16 years ago you started this. There was an article in the paper that I took out and I still have because I was so excited about this whole idea of global citizenship and a school that does that. So I am just really, it's wonderful to meet you. And I hope that what you've started can be duplicated everywhere. So thank you so much for following your dream, and you're amazing.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Elizabeth Ippel. It's been a pleasure, and it's been an honor to have you with us this evening. I know
Thank you
have
so much
to
for having me.
catch
I
a
wish I
flight
could
to-
stick around and chat, but you know where to find me now, and please come visit. This is maybe a good incentive for you to come and.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you again.
Well done. Safe travel. You know, this is our 9th, and excuse me, you could tell, but I'm COVID-free. But I'm fighting a little chest thing here. So this is our 9th annual Solemn Vespers for the World Day of Prayer for the Care for Creation. And this is the only one I'm aware of between the Orthodox and the Catholic within the United States. So this is a very, very special ceremony and time together in terms of how we're growing in Christian unity. And I remember Pope John Paul said, you know, they're 2 lungs of the church. So it's a blessing to have you with us. Thank you. Thank you for your many blessings. And I'd like to thank His Excellency, Bishop Casey, for your beautiful homily tonight, and for also to Larry for the beautiful liturgy, and Father Jerry for hosting us. And also some big shout outs to Terry and the communication team of Rob and Jim. It's a lot of logistics behind the scenes to make this happen. And Marty and Claire and Margie, the Martha sisters over here, making it always happen. And again, my friend George. So this is a process, right? We're constantly growing in our ministry to care for our common home. We're all called to that, as the bishops shared. And part of that is at the World Parliament of the Religions, that on August 17th, the Ecumenism Metro Chicago, which was founded by Cardinal George, coming up to the millennium, established the Chicagoland Christians United for the Care for Creation. And in that effort, 13 different churches came together in unity and signed this declaration, including the Greek Orthodox Church, the metropolis of Chicago, and the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago. And this is the first time it's been revealed. It's been right here. Here's the original document. In fact, the Baptists still need to sign it on Tuesday. So, and we were blessed that Bishop Casey was there, our Vicar General, to sign it on behalf of the church. Thank you. And we've had a lot of other support, obviously, the Sisters of St. Joseph and so many other people on Ecumenism Metro and Encyclical Working Group. Everybody who's involved in the Encyclical Working Group, if you wouldn't mind standing. Andy, I see you back there. Right here. This is great. Thank you. And so I invite you go over and check out the declaration. We have more refreshments over here. And just to thank you so much for being with us on this journey on caring for a common home. So if we could just close in prayer. And Father Rick, would you mind doing that? And this is a special time.
Thank you. Please stand. Your blessing, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Christ our God, we thank you for our opportunity to come together once again, to work for Christian unity, to work for the protection and preservation of our natural environment, which you have created. We seek to be stewards of all that you created. Help us to have a spirit of repentance and love for one another, especially those who are disadvantaged among us. And help us to give glory to you in everything that we do and say, together with your eternal Father and your all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. Thank you.